He wasn't just a teen idol, he was the blueprint. Ricky Nelson captured the hearts of an entire generation with his boy-next-door charm and natural star power. From dominating the family TV screen in The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet to setting the rock and roll charts on fire with his velvet voice, Ricky didn't just follow the path, he carved it. Fans screamed, radios blared, and television ratings soared, all because of one young man who became America's golden boy. But behind the clean-cut image was a legacy far bigger than fame, one that would outlive him and change his family's life forever. But behind the iconic smile and those golden melodies was a hidden truth few ever knew. Ricky Nelson's life was marked by intense pressure, heartbreaking personal losses, and a financial legacy that quietly multiplied even after his tragic death. While the world remembered the heartthrob, what they didn't see was the quiet empire growing in the shadows, an inheritance so massive it stunned even his closest family members when it finally came to light. This is the real story of what Ricky Nelson left behind, one that rewrites his legacy entirely. Born on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey, Eric Hilliard Nelson entered a world already brimming with stardom. His father, Ozzie Nelson, was a celebrated big band leader whose smooth swing sound defined the 1930s and 40s. From the very beginning, Ricky was destined for greatness, but no one could have predicted how deep, and how lasting, his impact would truly be. Ricky Nelson wasn't just born into fame, he was sculpted by it. His mother, Harriet Hilliard, was already a rising star in Hollywood, appearing alongside legends like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Paired with his father, Ozzie Nelson, a celebrated big band leader, the Nelson household was a breeding ground for American entertainment royalty. In 1944, the family launched The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet on radio, a show that didn't just entertain, it redefined the American family. When the show moved to television in 1952, it became one of the longest-running sitcoms in history, embedding itself into the cultural fabric of the nation. At first, actors portrayed David and Ricky, but by 1949, the real-life sons stepped into their roles, Ricky at just 9 years old. This wasn't just smart casting. It was revolutionary. The Nelsons weren't pretending to be a family, they were broadcasting a carefully curated version of their real lives to millions each week. It was reality television long before the genre had a name. Ricky's quiet charm, shy smile, and natural presence made him an instant favorite, and soon he was more than a TV character, he was a national obsession. As America tuned in weekly to this polished portrait of suburban life, Ricky Nelson was becoming something far more powerful, a generational icon. However, it was one performance on April 10, 1957, that made him a national celebrity instead of just a kid star. When Ricky played Fats Domino's I'm Walking on the show that evening, the audience's reaction was instantaneous and tremendous. Ricky's dual career in music and television was made possible by the song, which sold over 1 million copies and quickly rose to the top of the charts. Ricky's musical endeavors were not viewed as a gimmick, in contrast to many young actors who later became vocalists. His image was flawlessly marketable, his recordings were polished, and his vocal delivery was deep. Hits like Stud Up, which peaked at number 1, and Bop Baby, which sold over 750,000 copies in advance orders. He was more than just a teenage curiosity, as evidenced by his number 2 on the charts. He was a real musical powerhouse. Then, in 1958, came Poor Little Fool. The song wasn't even meant to be a single when it was released by Imperial Records, but DJs adored it and it became the first number 1. One song on the just-launched Hot 100 chart by Billboard. Suddenly, Ricky became a part of the history of music. Ricky Nelson put out over 30 singles between 1957 and 1962, more than 20 of which made it into the top 40. At the time, only Elvis Presley was faster than him. Ricky spent 2 weeks at the top of the charts with his debut album, and all 5 of his subsequent albums were in the top 10. 1. For someone who was still in his early 20s, he sold an incredible 60 million records by the early 1960s. He set the standard for what would eventually be called adolescent music with his rockabilly-infused pop sensibility. His cultural influence was further cemented in 1959 when he was nominated for a Golden Globe for his work in Rio Bravo with Dean Martin and John Wayne. The world was applauding, but Ricky's reality was much more nuanced. Since he was a young child, he has struggled with chronic asthma, which frequently kept him at home and hindered his ability to make friends and participate in normal teenage activities. Later on, he expressed that he felt as though he had lost out on childhood. He had to mature on camera due to fame, and the anticipation was never raised. Ricky's cool, collected exterior belied his intense introversion. He wrote songs, listened to music, and practiced the guitar for hours by himself. Isolation was the price he paid for the celebrity he appeared to wear with such ease. Ricky was attending recording sessions and rehearsals when other teenagers were participating in sports or school dances. There were no curfews or unfinished chores. There were performances to master and scripts to commit to memory. He was never really allowed to remain anonymous. And that lack of normalcy started to manifest by the early 1960s. The first real test of Ricky's career came when musical tastes changed and the Beatles dominated the American charts. In 1964, the British invasion caused many early American rock musicians to lose their prominence. The personification of clean-cut youthful rebellion, Ricky, felt out of date all of a sudden. Once yelling at his concerts, his fans were now waiting in line for something different. Once invincible, Ricky was now following rather than creating trends as he struggled to stay relevant. The silent disintegration of a man under the burden of his legacy was not visible to viewers. He was now stuck in an image that he couldn't get out of because of the celebrity that had made him a household name. And Ricky entered a new stage of life when the lights went down and the chart positions changed. One that was more questions than cheers. Develop the brand. Give up control. Ricky Nelson had become more than just a popular vocalist by the late 1950s. He was a complete business. Each time he appeared on the adventures of AZ and Harriet, he used it as a calculated opportunity to market his songs. With the accuracy of a military operation, his father, AZ Nelson, planned this merger. He was more than just Ricky's dad. He oversaw his finances, served as his manager, producer, and publicist. AZ has decades ahead of him in the quickly changing entertainment industry. From his Los Angeles home office at 1822, Camino Pauro Street, a residence that gained notoriety for its presence on the program. America had never seen a career like the one that AZ crafted. In order to make room for Ricky's songs, he had the scripts altered, and episodes frequently concluded with a musical number. Ricky didn't require conventional promotional channels like the Ed Sullivan Show thanks to this ingenious formula. He already had over 10 million weekly viewers, but there were restrictions on this enormous platform. AZ had strict control over Ricky's funds, schedule, and even personal preferences. Ricky received a meager weekly allowance, $50 of the $500 he was making at the age of 17, despite his fame. The remainder was either invested by AZ or used to pay taxes, production costs, and other family needs. Ricky felt poor in freedom despite his wealth and fame, and it was a commercial model masquerading as a family sitcom. Ricky's romantic life was also under AZ's control. Things became serious when Ricky started dating Marianne Gaba, a former beauty queen and his show co-star. Love Rick, he gave her a ring that was etched with Marianne's name. However, the Nelsons disapproved, particularly Harriet and AZ. They were worried that Ricky's reputation as America's ideal adolescent boy might suffer if he had a serious girlfriend. Later, Gaba stated that she thought they were getting married, but Ricky discreetly distanced himself under pressure from the same individuals who had made him famous. Prior to meeting Kristen Harmon in 1961, Ricky had a history of brief romances. She was a member of Hollywood royalty, the sister of Mark Harmon, who would go on to become a well-known TV personality in his own right, and the daughter of actress Elise Knox and renowned Michigan football player Tom Harmon. Gorgeous, blonde, and well-connected. Kristen met all the requirements for a Nelson bride. Their romance developed rapidly. When Kristen fell pregnant just 2 years later, marriage seemed inevitable. It's due to expectations and image, not necessarily romanticism. Ricky and Kristen were married in a solemn Catholic wedding on April 20, 1963. Despite not being a Catholic, Ricky consented to sign a commitment to raise their kids in the church. On paper, he accepted the faith and attended conversion sessions. It was an attempt to avoid controversy, preserve public decorum, and please Kristen's pious parents. However, the marriage was under tremendous strain from the beginning. For so long, Ricky had been taught what to do that this, too, felt more like a role to play than a life he chose. The pair appeared stable in spite of their tumultuous beginning. Soon after, Kristen played herself in the latter seasons of Azzie and Harriet's escapades. With the birth of Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam in the ensuing years, the Nelson brand grew to encompass a new generation. Images of the smiling Owen family regularly graced mag covers. But backstage, cracks in the glossy outside started to widen. As Ricky sought independence from Azzie's management, tensions grew. In 1966, after the show's long run ended, Ricky finally took steps to interrupt from his father's manage. He desired to discover new musical instructions, rent his very own band, and make selections without parental interference. This period marked the beginning of Ricky's quest for inventive identification, however also the unraveling of the tightly controlled global he'd acknowledged in view that formative years. The separation wasn't just expert. The emotional distance among father and son deepened. Ricky started out traveling extra and spending much less time at home. Kristen, meanwhile, struggled along with her personal problems, younger motherhood, dependency, and a developing feel of isolation. By way of the early 70s, what had as soon as seemed like the ideal Hollywood marriage turned into quietly becoming a tragedy in sluggish motion. Watch the empire crumble. By the 1970s, Ricky's golden boy glow had started to dim. The British invasion reshaped the song global. Acts like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who pushed out the clean-cut sound that one ruled American airwaves. Ricky tried to evolve, forming the Stone Canyon Band to explore United States rock, however audiences weren't listening. A humiliating second got here in 1971 at Madison Square Lawn while he became booed after refusing to play his antique hits. That night inspired his hit Garden Celebration, a soulful anthem of creative defiance. However, the harm became completed. In the meantime, his marriage became unraveling. The couple, as soon as a magazine-covered dream, had descended into chaos. Tablets and alcohol flowed freely. Therapy periods have been scheduled and overlooked. Via 1977, the situation became theatrical. Kristen locked Ricky out of their domestic and reportedly moved in with two cheerleaders from the Rams. The divorce could take years and value Ricky over $1 million in legal costs and aid. It left him emotionally battered and financially tired. To stay afloat, Ricky stored journeying, but he hated flying. In a selection that would hang out his legacy, he bought an antique 1944 Douglas DC-3 airplane to avoid buses and inns. The aircraft, as soon as owned by way of Jerry Lee Lewis, had an infamous preservation records. Ricky knew it turned into unreliable, however he became desperate. On December 31, 1985, while flying to Dallas for a New Year's Eve display, the plane caught fire and crashed in Sticker, Texas. Ricky, his fiancée Helen Blair, and 5 band individuals have been killed. He become best 45 years antique. Combat for the fortune he in no way noticed. After Ricky's loss of life, Maximum assumed his property became empty. His lavish spending, divorce settlements, and fading career had taken their toll. Initial reviews advised he died broke, or worse, in debt. But quietly, hidden inside the tangled net of contracts and royalties, a special fact waited to floor. It began whilst his brother David found a legitimate will signed simply 4 months earlier than the crash. The Desire named Ricky's 4 youngsters, Tracy, Matthew, Gunnar, and Sam as sole beneficiaries. His ex-wife or even his fiancée had been ignored. So turned into one extra mystery, a 5th son, Eric Jude Crew, born from a brief 1980 affair. Although paternity became showed by means of courtroom order in 1981, Ricky had left Eric out of the desire, mentioning the paternity became disputed. Eric obtained nothing. The estate's legal professionals started digging, and what they located turned into mind-blowing. Ricky had held on to vast rights to his song. An exceptionally uncommon circulate for artists of his generation. Each time Traveling Man played at the radio or Negative Little Idiot became downloaded on iTunes, money flowed in. But much of it wasn't reaching his heirs. Audits found out that predominant labels, including Sony Song and Capitol Records, had been underpaying or misreporting royalties, especially for virtual sales and global streaming. In 2018, the Nelson estate joined a class motion lawsuit against Sony. The label had allegedly manipulated intercomp deductions, charging itself internally across borders, reducing royalties to the artists. After 2 years of prison struggle, Sony settled for $12.7 million and agreed to restructure its royalty practices. Capitol Information quickly followed with a confidential payout and transparency guarantees. Subsequently, the estate became seeing justice, no longer just in money, but in acknowledgement. Reclaim the legacy and heal the circle of relatives. With lawsuits behind them and royalty payments finally flowing, Ricky Nelson's children confronted a new assignment, honoring their father's legacy. Each took a unique course. Tracy Nelson, born in 1963, overcame a series of brutal fitness battles, inclusive of Hodgkin's lymphoma, thyroid-most cancers, and breast-most cancers. She used her voice for advocacy, acting in public campaigns and writing a candid memoir, The Nelsons. She became greater than Ricky's daughter. She had become a symbol of resilience. Her twin brothers, Matthew and Gunnar, born in 1967, had tried to break out their father's shadow with their personal rock band Nelson. Their debut Unmarried, Cannot Stay Without Your Love and Affection, hit #1 in 1990, and their album, After the Rain, went double platinum. However, as grunge swept the charts, their glam rock fashion diminished. Rather than chasing trends, the twins released Stone Canyon Records, named after their dad's put-up idol band, and started out a tribute display known as Ricky Nelson Remembered. It became a success. The display didn't just carry out the songs, it told the tale, bringing Ricky's actual voice, humor, and heart to a brand new generation. Sam Nelson, the youngest, took a quieter direction. After a exceedingly public custody warfare in 1987 between his mom, Kristen, and his uncle Mark Harmon, Sam in the end pursued studies in psychology and movie. He works backstage, assisting manipulate the Nelson estate and hold his father's legacy with care. Although no longer within the spotlight, his role is critical. Then there was Eric Jude Group. Unnoticed of the will, driven to the margins, and more often than not absent from public lifestyles, Eric stays a complex part of the story. His lifestyles is a reminder of the imperfections and contradictions that shaped Ricky's private global. Whether reconciliation ever takes place between him and his siblings remains unsure. Ricky Nelson's adventure wasn't pretty much reputation or maybe the tune. It was approximately the complex legacy of a man who lived in the highlight but died in the shadows. What he left behind took years to discover. Rights, royalties, and relationships that were buried beneath the burden of decades. But his circle of relatives fought lower back. They reclaimed what became his. Preserved what mattered and became ache into motive. Now that you know the tale, what do you watched? Was justice sooner or later served for Ricky Nelson? Allow us to know inside the comments. And don't forget to like, percentage, and subscribe for more stories like